Basically very iconic in the AI world.
That's
Okay,
true.
hi Didi, welcome to Venture with Grace. We're live.
Hi, nice to be here. Thank you for having me, Grace.
Okay, to start the show, I would love for the audience to learn more about you. So, actually, you grew up in the US for like 9 years or like a few years, and then before you go back to India, I
Mhm.
guess like what are some like I guess I mean I almost asked what your parents do, but like I'm just so curious. But like I guess like what are some core lessons that you've learned early on in your career that you kind of took into to shape you into who you are today?
That's a great question. So I was born in India, but then I spent age 3 to 10 in America. Both my parents were working. They were in tech. My dad was
Mhm.
at IBM. My mom was at Oracle. And I actually, when I reflect on my childhood, it over time I've come to realize that my time in America was actually pretty critical for
Mhm.
the person I am. Mostly because in those 7 years I was going to this school in the Bay Area of
Mhm.
called Challenger School. It was this private elementary school where I would go be dropped off at like 7:30 in the morning and be picked up after my parents' work days were over at 6:30. So effectively had very little time with my parents. I mean, most of my time was with school and my friends.
Mhm.
And one of the things I learned very early on in life was think for yourself. The book is
Mhm.
not always right. Sometimes you just have to reason about what the right way to proceed is based on your principles. And
Mhm.
it turns out that I didn't even realize. I mean, when you're in the journey, you don't realize how important of a lesson that is. But over time I've begun to realize so many people did not have the fortune of being taught like that. So I think I organically became a bit of a rebel growing up because I was like, why would I listen to somebody else's opinion on something? It's your opinion, but I have my own. And so even with my parents, with school, with authority, I always felt like I had my own reason or opinion or a belief based on the things I knew. And I think that was really solidified in the 7 years of school that I was here because my teachers early on were very good friends of mine. And, I'd invite them to my birthdays as a 9-year-old, 8-year-old. And they would always encourage me to like think for yourself and come to your own conclusions. Don't just let anybody dictate how you should think about something. So I think that's the core lesson that stuck with me for a very long time.
Wow, that's like actually really interesting. I actually feel like it's very hard to think for yourself because sometimes like since like your parents sounds like they're very successful too. So like basically like how do you kind of like have your own opinion or like how do you arrive at a conclusion? Like do you I guess like how much research is like well researched about like a subject? I know I sound like I mean I have like a 1 year old, so like now I have to send them to Challenger school. So but anyway, so I don't know how you actually arrive at a decision. Even like I said, I don't. Like I constantly think about how we make decisions, but like I feel like a lot of the authority like are because of they're more successful or like let's say like oh by the way, hi. Hi Kumar. I wanted to shout out to any
Mhm.
audience who comments.
Of course.
So I wonder so how do you think about uh basically making career or like life choices by yourself? Like what is the thought process goes behind it?
I think well, there's a couple of things to say. The first thing I'll say is I over the course of the 30 plus years that I've been
Mhm.
alive have noticed that people pay a lot of time and attention thinking about things that don't matter at all. They spend a lot of time like debating these like quirky, like useless nuances on things without like thinking about big picture stuff. They often take the big picture stuff for granted and then they debate small stuff that doesn't matter. So people do a lot of like, hey, what should I major in? Which is still a big decision, but they'll like spend a lot of time thinking about that. Or they'll spend a lot of time thinking about, should I take this class or should I take that class in college? Should I be doing this extracurricular or that extracurricular? But most people don't spend time thinking about what is the arc of my life and why. And I
Oh
think at a
wow, deep.
very early age, I was like always curious about that stuff. And I think it comes down to this, and this is my second point is most of it comes down to first asking why, no matter
Mhm.
what you're told, and then figuring out, okay, you want me to go to college. When I was a kid, I would tell my parents this all the time, like, you want me to go to college and like work some job. Why? Like, okay, I need money. Why? Like, why is money useful? Where does money come from? Where do I want to spend it on? Is there something I need from it? And I think very early on I was like really concerned with those questions. I'm
Mhm.
like, why do anything at all? Why do I go to school? Why does both things outside in like nature and the realm of science and math, but also like just fundamentally, why does life work the way it does?
Mhm.
And so the first part, I think, is just asking the questions. And then when it comes to finding answers, I mean, now more than ever, I think you should just do research. I mean, there's so many opinions of so many smart people that are on podcasts, on blog posts, online. You can find so many people who have a different answer to this. And then you start reasoning about, okay, maybe for some people, college doesn't matter. Then you ask another why. Like, why are some people more very successful without going to college? But also, some people are pretty successful when going to college. What is the difference between those things? And so I think when you let that curiosity drive you, you get to a pretty interesting worldview where then over a long period of time, you're like, I think I understand a little bit about how this thing works. And I think that's what I would encourage even younger kids or people to do is allow people the liberty for your son, for example, allow people the liberty to ask the question why, and then encourage them to figure out the answer themselves and don't tell them. So like, this is what I think, but you figure out what you think.
Mhm.
And I think that's very empowering because people don't realize this. Kids look up to parents. So if you have an opinion, whether or not you force it down their throats, eventually they will listen. But they also need to come to that conclusion themselves. They don't like long term, it's not sustainable for you to just tell them and them to internalize it, I think.
I actually have another question. Well, okay, maybe we could go into like your journey a little bit more on like, how do you pick Glean? So like it seems like was it from the KPCB engineering fellow or like how do you come across Glean and then why do you join? Obviously it's a very successful company. Arvin was on the pod. A bunch of like Glean investor were on the pod as well. But curious like how did you find the company and how do you decide like which company to join? Because there's like a million startups.
So I was at Google at the time. I'd spent
Mhm.
about 4+ years there, and I
Mhm.
had come to the realization that, hey, this is probably not the best place for me to be at this part of my career. I can go into why. So that was the first part. Then I thought, okay, I think ideally I want to start a company. And I had a couple of things that I wanted to figure out about starting companies that I just didn't know. So my first step was really to talk to a bunch of people in venture. I thought that was a pretty good step. I'm like, who has the most knowledge at a high level about a wide variety of startups? Probably the people who spend all day investing in them. So I talked to them, and then you quickly realize, okay, some people seem to know what they're talking about. Some people don't know what they're talking about. Some people are using proxy signals to judge. So you get some lay of the land of what a good startup looks like. Then I started actually having meetings. This was a long process. So I had a meeting with a bunch of different companies, and I would approach those meetings very much like I was interviewing them. I'm like, hey, why are you doing this? Can you tell me about it? What's your vision here? Why do you think it'll work? And I think I had more than maybe, I want to say, 50 different startups that I'd met with. And I started at that point to think maybe something's off with me because I'm also calibrating to what a normal seed or different startups were of different stages, but I was trying to calibrate myself to what good even looks like for a startup, and I didn't know. And so, when someone comes and tells you, I know you're very smart, but you haven't figured it out. I didn't know if at a seed stage, should you have figured it out? Like, is this normal? Is this not? After a lot of conversations, I was introduced through one of my bosses to Arvin. Then they was like, hey, here's a person I worked with at Google. I think you should talk to him. He is about to start a company. And then that conversation changed everything for me, where it was very clear from talking to Arvin that he set the bar at a very different benchmark from everybody
Mhm.
else I'd spoken to. He was very clear about what he wanted to build. There was no question in his mind that this was a big market. It was a market that was actually a useful problem to solve for people. Number two, he had a very good story about why he thought we could win that market. It wasn't obvious. Enterprise search at the time was something that had been tried, maybe hundreds of times before. It was the most common idea in the world. Like, people have been trying it since the 90s. It's not new. So why would this one work? And why haven't other ones worked before? So we did a little brainstorming, but even he had a good thesis of why then. And then the third thing, I think, and by far the most important thing, is I had come to understand at that point, I still believe this, is that in the early days of a company, the two biggest risk factors are ability to fundraise and ability to hire. Because those really change the dynamics of the set of opportunities you can do. If I have 15 million of runway at a seed, I can hire a team of 12 and build product for about 2 years, maybe more, and get to PMF. I give myself a lot of headroom. On the other hand, if I'm a company that can only raise 500K, I don't have that headroom. I just can't cover that surface area of product. So he had the both of those two things, which I thought were completely de-risked, at least us getting to a Series B. So that's how I was looking at it. I'm like, look, you have a great idea that clearly you have a lot of good reason to believe it works. You have a reason why this one works. And three, you can hire and you can fundraise better than anybody else, most other people. And that is the biggest risk factor. And if there was a four, you have a distinct right to win in enterprise sales. You've literally done this before. You've built a multi-billion-dollar business with Rubrik. So those four to me at that point were reason enough to not go and start my own thing and to not consider anybody else. I'm like, this makes so much sense. And it was, several standard deviations above what normally I would see from other startups. And that's why I chose eventually to join Glean in 2019. It was called something else then.
Mm. I wonder, so like I guess like another question is like I think it's a very separate topic. So like I guess not separate topic, but let's I want to piggyback on some like operational question on like how do you select the 50 startup that you chat with? Is that just like anyone you stumble upon, like or you see a job offer or you went through like the YC list? Like how do you pick the 50 companies? And you mentioned that like one of your mentor, like someone that you know also knows Arwen and they made like a warm introduction. But I feel like the thing is like okay so how do you walk through that conversation to like be like hey I'm actually looking for my next role, here's my criteria, which you like back in time you probably didn't really have one because since you tried with 50 coming their own not it. So I guess like how do you have the conversation and then the person how do you like approach people who can introduce you because I think there since you're a VC today so like everyone will come to you for advice like your mentees that are like I guess the next gen DDs are like coming over and then be like hey can you introduce me to blah blah blah. How do you think about the entire process of like finding a job in a very um high potential startup and also joining them at the very beginning stage because I think that's a really big key as well. You're the founding engineer and like right now if like anyone trying to join Cursor it's like freaking impossible.
Yeah.
So how do you think about that approach
Okay.
of
So
joining 50?
two-part answer. Number one is I would call it sourcing. How do you figure out who to chat to?
Right.
I made a lot of these mistakes. So this is the polished version of the answer after I know all the things I did wrong. I think perhaps the best way is to go and talk to good VCs. If you go too high in VC, you might not get a conversation. If you go too low, you might not get anything of value. Somewhere in the middle of somebody who understands things in venture, but still will have free time for you. They also have incentive to help you because they are trying to make their own company successful, but you do have to discount a couple of things they say if they're going to try to feed you to their own portfolio companies. By and large, you'll average it out by talking to enough people. So that's where I would start. I think that you can do the Angel List, the Hacker News, the YC companies. All of that is great too. I find it very hard to distinguish what's good and bad just from looking at those lists. And it can get really hard because you can click into people's LinkedIns, you can see what they do, but you never really know if it's good or bad. So I think all of the early stage opportunities, and that's where I think that's the only place you can actually create meaningful financial value for yourself. I think it's the best risk reward ratio is to go early. And if you want to join a less than 10-person company before it's made a name for itself, most of these guys don't have public job postings at all. You don't even know what the company is or whether it's good or not. And you assume because you haven't heard of it, it's not good. So going through VCs is probably the easiest way to get access to that essentially proprietary job opportunity. So that's how I would do it in terms of pure sourcing. And then other friends and stuff, of course. But usually warm referrals help the best. People underestimate how valuable the warm referrals are in the sense people who usually have pretty good judgment. So they will, be able to show you good stuff. The second part is, how do you then approach actually doing that conversation well? I think the biggest mistake that people make, one is the inevitable look. If you are not technical, it is so hard. Like, that is just facts. There's, I mean, for most companies that are under 10 people in tech, they don't have a need to hire somebody non-technical. They might have one non-technical person, and if you want to be the first non-technical person at a startup, be prepared to grind a lot. It is not easy. You are essentially picking up every task of the company, whether or not it's related to your job. There's no job description for that role. It is, you are the non-technical person. We will see if you become a product person or a recruiting person or a marketing person or a salesperson. But right now, you are chief non-technical person. And so your job is to do everything that we cannot do as founders. Some call it chief of staff, whatever. That's a really hard job to gun for. So let me leave that aside for a bit. It's way harder. If you are technical, it's actually a lot simpler. Most people are just trying to find good talent that's interested in them. And most candidates, I think, do the wrong strategy of spraying too broadly. They don't know anything about the company they're working for, they're talking to, and they're not doing basic diligence. I mean, 90% of candidates just don't do basic diligence on the company. Who are the people? Why? What does the company do? What are the competitors? Like, just prepare. It takes half an hour. Now you have like all these AI models. Just go ask one to do the research for you, if nothing else. Come to the conversation somewhat prepared with just a somewhat smart set of questions. And I think that already puts you in the top 10 percentile of candidates. There's too many people who especially come from these FANG backgrounds, who come in thinking that they are the gift to the company. And I'm like, that attitude is the problem. You might be great, but you can't come into a conversation being like, so I'm here to talk to you. When can I start? Or are you good enough for me? Is the kind of tone that I sense a lot of people have without doing any research into the company. Like, learn about the company, learn about a little bit about what they're trying to do, and try to add value. Those are the two things that make people stand out: being thoughtful about the company and figuring out how you can add value to the company even before you start. So some things that have worked for me, even when I was recruiting at Glean in the past, is I love when people build side projects, and I love when people build something, especially to prepare for a conversation. And I always tell people, like, this is the most open book secret in the world. If I want to crush an interview with somebody that's not even a real interview, I will literally build something that person cares about. And it takes zero time in today's day and age. And I will show them what I built. In the beginning, I'll be like, hey, man, could I show you something? This is something I've been working on. And even if it's an hour of work, you show them the thing you've built, you've won the interview in the first 10 minutes. The person will be like, nobody ever does this. You are crazy. I like you. You researched stuff about me. You found out something I was interested in. And you built something pretty cool. Just do that. But everybody else just sends a resume and writes this ChatGPT 3-paragraph thing. I'm not reading that. I'm not reading your resume. So it just doesn't work. So that's how I would approach the conversation.
For the 50 conversation you had, were it with the founders or was it just like a hiring manager?
It depends on the stage. So I think for earlier stage, it was usually with the founder. As you go through series B and C, usually with somebody else. Sometimes you do a quick call with the hiring manager before you talk to somebody else. Many ways to navigate that. I would usually say, hey, I would love to speak to the founder just because I want to understand their vision, but I understand if they're not available. So, and I was always open with timing and stuff. Like, whenever they want to call, I'm happy to have a conversation with them. So yeah, that's what I would say.
I'm also curious about the projects that you're building. So like you mentioned, like it doesn't take much time. First of all, I feel like as a non-technical person, I'm already dead in the first round. But like right now, there's a lot of tools that you technically can build, but I feel like the amount of research that you have to do, also build something and then do that 50 times, it's kind of not that easy. It takes some times. How do you prioritize? Like, do you talk to the most likely good people on paper first, or like do you do, I don't know, like how do you kind of like actually go through the process? Though I'm not like, yeah, I feel like this is like a question that not applying to me, but like I just felt like I'm fascinated by your answer.
I I think I have an answer for non-technical people too. I'm not saying it's always
Go for
about
it.
like,
Yeah.
go build something and you have to
Yeah,
show
yeah.
some code. Like that's not the point of it. I think building something is an easy way to show that you're clearly interested and you're not screwing around here. When I approach it, the things that I would build are, probably vibe code something interesting right
Mhm.
now, but probably build some small quick app. To your point, yeah, I'm not doing that for 50 companies. So usually it's when I'm in, like somewhat interested in the company and I want to make an impression, then I would go and gravitate to doing that. But there's always pared down versions that you can do from a non-technical and technical side. From a technical side, I would come in and say, look, Arvind, like actually studied the 5 points that you said before about why you're differentiated. And I actually think, like, have you considered these things? Like there's other points that I don't think you've really considered. What do you think about these? Like, I just wanted to get your opinion on them. And it serves two purposes. It's a genuine question for me. And two, he's like, wow, you've actually gone and done your research. Like, this is crazy. You just can't treat startups like they're big companies. There's no hiring process. There's no bar. There's no like 3-4 rounds. And then if you pass the lead code, then you're in. It's really a question of, can I work with you? And are you going to be all in on this thing that like all of
Mm,
us are? And that requires you to show interest. And for non-technical people, I say there's other ways you can show interest. Like there's so many other non-technical parts of the business that you can think about. Like, do a competitive deep dive on like, here's the 4 competitors. I went and tried all their products and I have some stuff to show you. Do you know
totally.
how useful that is? Like if you go to a seed company and just say, I know y'all don't have time to do this. So I went
Mhm.
and did a deep dive on your 3 competitors. And I think here's where the features are lacking. Here's what you have good. Here's what you have bad.
Mm,
That might take a couple hours, but I guarantee you will nail the interview without them even asking a question. Right? Like
mm,
you've done the work. You clearly care. You show insight. You show being able to be proactive before being asked to do things. You've implicitly shown that I can succeed in this role,
mm.
and that's how I would. One of the things that you could do.
Mm. I wonder, so separate question. So we talked about the Glean era, and then maybe we could later on talk about how you joined Menlo. But I think like one of the things I found really interesting is you guys started like an Anthropic related fund. So maybe you could talk about that. And like, because I feel like that's such a I think that's exactly if I'm like, I mean, obviously I'm not at your firm, but I feel like that's such a smart move for you guys. The anthology fund, I cannot pronounce it, but anyway, so like how do you think about that approach? And how do you I guess that's just like creating an ecosystem fund for Anthropic, I would assume. That's like 25K per company, or like maybe you can share a little bit more about on that. And then I feel like that's such a great sourcing funnel for Menlo. But like I mean, I don't know what you want to talk about, but like I feel like that's such an interesting initiative. So I wanted to cover here.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me talk about that for a bit. Anthology, the anthology fund was one of the reasons that I wanted to join Menlo. It was a
Mhm.
really fun idea. It was really interesting to me. It's $100 million vehicle that we run with Anthropic in partnership with Anthropic. Um, Menlo is one of the biggest equity holders in Anthropic, and we always had this idea that this is clearly a new era of AI models that will have an ecosystem around it, and ecosystems don't come out of thin air. There's a lot of work that goes into building an ecosystem, both from a company side and from Anthropic, but also from a financial side and funding companies that you want to build on your ecosystem and that you can work more closely with. The idea was we have $100 million fund, but we didn't want to run it quite as a corporate venture fund.
Mhm.
Corporate venture funds have a lot of subtle dynamics, which we think are probably not the best way to run a fund. They are run almost explicitly with the intent of bolstering the ecosystem. So they're not really choosing, in many cases, they don't choose the best companies. They
Mhm.
choose companies only because they can help the ecosystem. And I don't think that's a healthy way to grow an ecosystem. So it's somewhat self-serving. So we spoke to Anthropic and agreed on this idea of, we will help run the fund. We will run it with you and have you guys on board. We will still do a lot of the ecosystem work, but we also want to go and help a bunch of these companies that might be slightly even off thesis for you and generally help the broader AI ecosystem. So what we do is we offer companies a lot of benefits, right? So we have obviously a bunch of credits. We have 30K Anthropic credits. It goes up if we do more money into you. We have 100K in AWS credits, office space, all this other stuff. But that's probably one of the draws. Our anthology founders tell us the bigger draw is you have this pretty selective community of founders who are 25 companies that can learn from each other's experiences and how they are building with AI, and also be very close to the Anthropic team, which is one of the best teams when it comes to figuring out how to do modern engineering on an AI stack. So
Mhm.
they find those sessions super valuable. How do you think about product? How do you think about retention? How do you think about architecture? And then for us, the benefit is we get to be into a variety of companies at various stages that may not be a part of the core Menlo thesis. And the core Menlo thesis would be, hey, we want 15 to 20% ownership in a company. We're only going to do few deals a year, and then we're going to help those companies through to an exit. Now we can do a lot more. We have a lot more flexibility in check size, and we can say, hey, we have a vehicle to work with all of you together. And then from that pool, if we see people doing well, we can go and find a way to work with you and maybe even preempt your next round and bring you in as an official, like, proper Menlo bet. So that's kind of how we see the entire program. And then for Anthropic, of course, is the other side of the puzzle. Anthropic loves the fact that they can work directly with these companies that are on the cutting edge of how to build on these tools. And they can figure out, hey, what does our ecosystem want? What should our product roadmap look like? And that's the three-pronged approach here.
I have a question on this. So let's say you are, um, I guess like a GPU provider company or well, I'm not talking about Nvidia. I'm talking about like, like a mini together AI or something like, or how do you think about they could build some sort of like joint partnership with a fund, and what kind of ecosystem people should be involved? Because like right now you're talking about like, Anthropic, there's AWS, like they're offering credits, and then Menlo come in and then be the selector and then bring the deal flow, because I'm sure you guys have like a ton of earlier stage deal flows, and like maybe or like even just on Anthropic ecosystem people are building on top of it, and like just having this ecosystem fund makes sense. But like I guess like if you're running like a cloud GPU company, how would you kind of like go about this approach?
I mean, we have very close, first let me say we have very close partnerships with NVIDIA and AWS for all of the computing that they offer. And
Right.
so for anthology companies specifically, yeah, they go, in the cases that they need to, they get a lot of their GPU needs met by those partners.
Mhm.
If your question is, how would I think about that if you were trying to run a similar fund with a GPU partner? Is that the question?
Yeah, kind of.
I would select for companies. I think the focus of the fund would be a little bit different
Mhm.
because people building on. I mean, the layers are a bit different. So people building on
Mhm.
Anthropic, in my opinion, is a little bit of a broad set. People building on top of GPUs directly is a slightly smaller set of companies, but they're also very, very interesting companies. And so I would go and pick the companies who have these GPU needs, and there's so many of them, and then work with those. And so, for example, there's a lot of people doing drug development and building a model to do that. That would be a great candidate for a company in, say, if you were running this fictional NVIDIA fund, then it would be a great candidate for that. Obviously, NVIDIA has N Ventures; they have a fund.
Mhm.
There's companies that are doing cutting edge material science research with foundation models. That's pretty interesting for a fund like that. So really deep foundational model work that requires GPUs, I think, are the best fit for funds like that. And I would just focus on that set.
How do you think about like, do you think like Airbnb for GPU makes sense or not? Like, serving the non-core, like, I feel like a regular, if you're like a venture-backed startup in a later stage, you already have like the core partners like NVIDIA or something else. But like, for the people that are like trying to build something like you mentioned about like, material science, uh, model, or like just like people who are like working in a lab, like on the side, they're building a model. Does the need actually exist? Or like, do you feel like it's kind of like a fake assumption of like people will actually use Airbnb for GPUs?
I think that there is a need. I don't know how big the need, how distributed the need is. I know there's a big need for
Mm,
GPUs. The real question when it comes to a business like that, there are businesses like that. I mean, a lot of cloud businesses are
mhm,
essentially that. The hyperscalers offer GPUs that you can
mhm,
rent. The On the top end of the market, there are people who are going to require, I mean, I call it on the order of 10,000 plus GPUs.
mhm,
When it comes to an order of that scale, Airbnb for GPUs, if you want to make any margin, it's not going to make sense for them. They're probably going to go direct and figure out a way to build their own stuff if they need GPUs beyond a certain capacity.
mhm.
Like XAI has got it done, and a bunch of other companies are considering to do. So there's that. And then there's the long tail of the market where you're like, okay, you might need a GPU, but you're like using it once a month. So even if I run this business, it's just not a good business. I'm getting $4 off of you, and there's not many of these customers, and they're very low volume. So the way I would think about that business is, okay, how big is the middle? Like you really need a very chunky middle for this to work out. So bunch of people spending, I don't know, on the order of, call it 10 to 50K a month on GPU spend. So they're at a weird middle ground where they need GPUs. They're not really, really big where they're going to get their own. And then you serve that need. So that's kind of like from a more first principles level how I would think about that market. But at the same time, that market clearly exists. There are hyperscalers doing that. There are other companies doing that. On a business level, I would say the hard part about doing that is it's essentially going to be if you own the GPUs yourself, it's going to be a low margin business, and you're going to have to underwrite demand predictability. So if you essentially buy a bunch of GPUs and no one's using it, then you're screwed. And if you don't buy enough, then you're still screwed. So it's really a question of, can you get the supply demand on that marketplace to work correctly? Even though it's a low margin business, you can still get insane volume just by making that happen. There's a bunch of companies, I don't know, I think Lambda Labs, Crusoe,
Right,
et cetera,
everyone.
et cetera, who have a bunch of GPUs that they're renting out like this.
Um, totally. I wonder, okay, so another question is on like brand. So like the 2 days ago, like on our podcast, we had the Cluely founders.
I love them.
They're like very interesting founders. And I wonder, like, so they mentioned about like, OpenAI is like a lot higher valuation because of they are doing many, just like they're doing marketing right, and compared to, okay, another model, I wouldn't name names, but I wonder, how do you think about like, is marketing everything in the AI era, or like how do you think about like prioritizing product versus like, hiring 50 interns to marketing your company? Do you think this have longevity, or you feel like it's just like a
So
bag check on the internet?
I first want to say Roy is one of the boldest people I've ever met. I know it's not a very popular opinion. He's a controversial character, but I just think like he has a lot of that core rebel DNA,
Mhm.
and I just like seeing it. Like he's doesn't do everything right in my opinion, but he's curious and he's bold. So I genuinely think he's a great. He has the ingredients to be a very special founder at some point in his life, if not now. So that aside, talking about marketing and distribution, essentially, yeah. To start it off, it is absolutely a huge problem that so many companies that are even very, very big Fortune 500 scaled companies are beginning to realize. Distribution does not come for free anymore. It doesn't even come if you run ads anymore. You have to be creative if you want to get distribution. The audience has shifted. People don't fall for traditional kinds of marketing anymore. Back in the day, you could run some Google ads, some Facebook ads, put a billboard up, and you'd be fine because that space wasn't crowded. Now that is insanely crowded, and users are like, I'm not falling for this. It's a really bad way to get users because those users also don't care. They're not very organic users that are very invested in your product. True word of mouth style growth comes from certain places where you get people on the beginning of the S curve who are extremely willing to try things, and then they espouse those products because they love them. And that's how great organic growth happens, which is kind of the dream for every company in various shapes or forms. Now, coming to his question about models, OpenAI very quickly realized that they had a business in consumer, and they could make so much money with these subscriptions, and I think it became a natural focus for them to optimize for that. And I think, Sam kind of said it himself in this interview. I don't think he meant to say this, but he was like, would I want the smartest model in the world or a billion users? And he's like, I'd want a billion users. And that kind of goes to show what the focus of that company is. And he's right. I mean, if you have a billion users on a product, it is an insanely good business. You will find ways to monetize that. And if you are going for a consumer business where you want a billion users, we all know that growth is everything for that kind of business. On the other hand, for enterprise, growth doesn't always look like that. You can be a very fantastic enterprise business and have very few people even know that you exist. So the first thing I'd say is it depends on what you want to do. Generally, it matters, but it really depends on where the business focus is. The second thing I'll say is, yeah, it's absolutely important. It's extremely important to crack marketing. I tell a lot of the founders I work with this is, think what you will of Roy. He is a marketing genius. He just knows what people resonate with. And I used to think that was easy, but most people have no clue what people resonate with. They're too stuck in their own head or their own set of friends or their own bubble of people. They don't know how to translate what's important to them to what matters to people. And I can tell you this firsthand is I told Roy this also at Glean. I interviewed like 4 or 5 CMOs of fairly reputable organizations, and I was extremely disappointed with how unaware they were about their users. They don't know anything. I mean, you know how to run an ad campaign, great. Anyone can learn that. But do you know what the user wants to hear? Do you know how to sell to the user, how to market to the user? And they don't. And my question to them is, I'm like, look, if you can't get 100 people to read your blog post, how are you a CMO? You can't market yourself. So what have you done? So I feel like there's like the traditional era of marketers aren't always very good at this modern era of what you need to succeed, and it's extremely important for companies. Attention is kind of saturated. You need to get people's attention, and to get people's attention, you need to understand what resonates with them. So yeah, that's a long-winded answer to say I agree. Marketing is extremely important. Different companies have different focuses on the kinds of marketing they do.
I wonder, as an investor, what's your thought on like 150K on an ad?
What do you mean? On a
So, I mean,
150K ad?
yeah. So like the Cluely people's, I
Oh,
asked them like how much that's an ad cost. They mentioned it was 150K. Unless I'm remember wrong, I'm sorry if that's the case, but I think that's around the ballpark. So yeah, as an investor, if you are an investor of their company, like how do you think about that kind of approach?
there's no one answer to this. I think it's one of those things where if the 150K ad does 25 million impressions like Roy's did, then it's a good idea. But if it didn't, then you can always go back and say, yeah, maybe that wasn't a good idea. Generally, the way investors, or the way I would think about it, most investors would think about it is, look, when I have made the decision to fund a company, I have given trust to the founder in how to spend this money. It is not my job to call these shots. I can have an opinion, but this is not my job. If you decide it's a good idea, then you do it. It's your company. You have all the right to go and do that. And I have like basically entrusted you with the judgment to make these calls. And my personal opinion would really vary based on who's doing it. For Roy, yeah, I mean, the dude is a genius at marketing. Like, for him spending 150K, I would be surprised if it didn't work. But then if you had a very traditional founder who's basically never done anything organically in marketing, never posted once on like a platform, has never written a blog post, is very out of touch with what people feel, and they come and tell me, hey man, I want to do a 500K ad campaign, I'm like, I don't know, man. I feel like you should probably try other things first and work your way up to a point where you can do that, instead of throwing money at a problem that's not going to solve that problem. So that's kind of the rationale I would have when I think about things like this.
How do you think about like an audience build on your own? Because you're like very popular on X, on like LinkedIn, and like, when did you start it like intentionally doing so? And how do you just in general, how do you think about building an audience?
People hate my answer to this because I think they think it's not true to some extent, but this is genuinely how it happened. I joined Glean in 2019. at Glean was the first time I felt like my employer wasn't breathing down my neck trying to make me say or not say certain things online. Google
Right.
and Facebook are very hard. Those are the two other companies I was at, are very hard places to actually be able to write online because there's 100 different legal policies on what you can and can't do, and
Yeah.
your job is at risk. So at first thing step was, okay, now I can actually write. And I always enjoyed writing. In general, I enjoy writing, I enjoy reading, I enjoy things like that. It is important to me to generally express things I find cool more than anything else. So I started like kind of posting things that I thought were cool for no real reason. I think most of those have 0 likes. Like it's not for any purpose whatsoever. It's just like, hey, I found this thing cool. Then occasionally some things would get 10 likes, and I was like, oh shit, people think this is cool. This is awesome. Around early 2020, I had this conversation with my friend. He told me, hey, a lot of the ideas you have are really bad. If you thought they were really good, in fact, you would write about them online. And I'm like, that's an interesting point. You've played this on me. And it got me thinking. I'm like, he's right. A lot of the things people say out loud are actually really bad ideas. And then we get into this fight because we're in the moment. um, why not just go and post online? Because then if it meets my own bar for what's publishable under my name, that's a way to vet the idea. And I found that as I started doing a random thing, a random rabbit hole of interest that I would go down, when I would post them, it would force me to do the extra 20% work at the end to refine the idea into something good. And a lot of times, you think you have a thought, you're like, oh, this is a great thought, and then you're about to press send and you're like, it's not a great thought, I should do some more work on this. And refining that process happened around early 2020. And then I just told myself, well, look, it's the pandemic, I might as well do one of these a day. That's my goal. One of my personal goals was, I'm going to do a thought a day. And that's all I did for, I mean, it's not all I did, but that I kept those principles, and then a couple of others, like no politics, usually no jokes, no talking about sports, only like tech and a couple of areas that I really cared about. And over the last 4 years, it just grew because I was consistently doing things that interested me. And that's kind of the story there. It was never really to build a following or anything like that. I always enjoyed sharing stuff. Like my first viral thing was actually, well, one of my first viral things was a resume template that I wrote for in sophomore year that's now been used over 1 million times, and I thought that was cool. And then before that, I wrote a blog about hacking the Indian education system and finding anomalies, statistical anomalies in those results. And then that became very viral and had millions and millions of views, and it got all this media press in India. So, I was always used to writing, and this was like a forcing function for me to do it more often.
Is I have like 3 question
Yeah.
on this segment. So like I think like one part is about posting ideas. Like your friend mentioned, like, I mean, honestly, I think I have some alpha in the most basic ideas. Like, I couldn't really polish them into like a viral tweet because some of the ideas are like so dumb. Like, most people will think I'm a freaking idiot, but I think in the long run, in 10 years, it's like a really good idea that I actually think it's an alpha that I would not actually want to expand to the public. And so I actually don't want people to steal my idea. If that's the one idea that I have, like the stuff that I posted are like, that's fine. It's like detail oriented ideas, right? But like, I wonder, how do you think about if you actually have an alpha that you don't want to share? And another problem is like, not problem, but like, I guess like question is like, I think of stuff that go viral. So for example, I feel like Roy is like an organic viral character on the internet, right? So like, it's like, it's thought provocative. It's like things that like people have very, like different opinion. It's a kind of black and white vibe things. So like that will actually help you go viral, but that's not actually a lot of people's general idea. Like, I mean, I have ideas, but like they're mostly like in the gray area all the time. Like it's not gray area, but it's like more of like, it's not black and white. It's kind of like complicated. So like it's not like, you double think things, right? But like it's like for his idea, like when you articulate out, it's like a very viral idea, but like that doesn't reflect your actual opinion about things. So that will help you attract a lot of audience. But on the other hand, are they quality audience, or are they just like there for the sake of being there? But after coming out of like the crypto era, I feel like marketing is literally everything. I don't know if you have any cadence. So you mentioned That's like I'm sure like the algo changed since like 2020. I feel like the LinkedIn algo also changed. So like how do you navigate the algo changes on that? Like and then back in time you were posting once a day. So like recently I saw you were tweeting literally 4 times a day. So like I guess how not today, but like I mean recently. Every day you have multiple posts. That's what I'm trying to say. So how do you think about are the algorithm gonna only promote one piece of content a day? Or like do you feel like I mean I heard about a lot of Twitter people say you have to post 8 of them and then like one of them will hit or something. So like is quantity better or quality better for you?
Okay, a lot of questions. Let me get into all of them.
Yeah.
So on alpha, this is very clear for me. I usually think that nothing really has alpha. So if you have uncovered an interesting insight and you share it, odds are, even if you shared it, no one else will have the same passion for the insight that you do.
Mhm,
So I would not be concerned about it. I,
mhm,
I generally think that is overrated. And I think
mhm,
sharing things that you find interesting and that you might have alpha over is good.
mhm,
And it has this effect of people just thinking that you are the expert in that. So
mhm,
and it's a good feedback loop. So if you share something with alpha and you get people to engage, it kind of forces you to dig deeper into the idea, and then it kind of is a feedback loop where you actually kind of become pretty much of an expert in some stuff like that. And it's happened to me too, like random rabbit holes where I posted something I knew like 5% about, people reacted to it so well, so I'm like,
mhm,
okay, maybe I should learn some more, and then I became better and better and better over time. So generally my view is post your alpha. There's nothing really that has that much alpha.
mhm,
um on virality and I mean provocative content, this is a hard one because I realize very quickly, and most people will realize when they if they post often enough, that there are hacks to virality.
mhm,
You can be outrageous, you can be flagrant, you can say crazy things, you can be extremely funny, you can crack jokes. These are all great hacks to to virality. um Talking about divisive news events, talking about generally divisive stuff and having a side, controversial stuff. These are all great ways to go viral. I understand that. And honestly, it is very hard for me not to do it because I like that kind of stuff. So, but I tell myself it is not worth two things. Number one, just because something gets likes does not mean it's useful. And you learn that very quickly just by looking at numbers. So likes and follows are not correlated. Sometimes you get 300 likes on something and you get 200 follows. That's an important post. Sometimes you get 10,000 likes on something and 2 follows. This is actual numbers. They're not correlated. What you really want is for people to care about the things you say, not for people to like the one odd thing you say. It's kind of like a person at a party. They can crack 100 jokes and they're very funny and fun to be around. But you're like, are you going to think that person is the coolest or smartest person there? No, it's like, you're just funny. People like being around you, but that's not the point. So, similarly, like you can have engaging people at parties that are not
mhm,
are not the smartest people at the party or the most important people or useful people at the party. So I think virality for me, it was very important to draw my lanes. I'm like, here are 4 or 5 topics I care about, and I have a set of principles that I will follow when I post about these things. I'm not going to post divisive content. I'm trying to kind of try not to do anything that's too provocative, and stay within the bounds of reason that I think I would like to see in somebody else. Like, I don't want people to be like always like, hey, look at how I screwed this thing up, or like, oh my god, I look how shitty this thing is. That's crazy. Like, you can do that and it's great. And I'm friends with people like that, and I do that in my personal life. I just don't think it builds a good online audience. You want to be seen, or I want to be seen as somebody who is useful, factual, trustworthy, doesn't take sides on most things that you don't need to take sides on, something like someone like that. And if that's the person I want to be, in order to be useful, that's what I'm going to try to do. And if I have to cut back on my virality for that, I will. That's okay. So that's on virality. When it comes to you talked a little bit about being useful, or another way to think about how to post content, what kind of content to post. I think the principle I use is, it's not easy to do. It's way, way harder to do than it is to say. Is I read what I'm going to write, and I'm like, if I'm trying to imagine myself as the average person reading this post that probably follows me, and think, would I gain value out of this? it is extremely hard to do because most people don't have a calibration to what they find interesting and what their
Mhm.
audience will find interesting. Because, and I see this with all of my very, very smart friends. I have so many like genius friends who are way smarter than me who don't post online, right? They have many, many reasons to not do that. And often the main issue is their bar for interesting, everyone's bar for interesting is based on their context. So everything they already know for like 2 years, they don't find interesting. And they say it out loud. And I have to tell them, dude, the thing you just said, fascinating. And they're like, this is obvious. And I'm like, well, it's not obvious to everybody. And it's a constant dance of figuring out what is obvious to you and useful to other people that you can share. And so I try to do that as much as I can. It's like, what is useful for people to share? Not like, what do I find cool? Because often what you find cool is a very ill-formed, ambiguous idea that is not interesting or useful. And so it's a lot like college essay writing. It's like what you think that the college admissions officer wants to hear is like a really ill-formed, not good depiction of yourself. The real good depiction of yourself is so obvious that you don't even want to write it down. You're like, oh, this is not that interesting. Anyway, so that's on usefulness. Then the last thing you asked was cadence. There's times I do 4 times a day and I'm not proud of it. It's usually when I just have a lot of free time between my meetings and I'm like, I have half an hour between a meeting. I don't know if I can get any real work done. Let me post something interesting. Generally, I try to do 1 to 2 a day. So I have my morning slot, evening slot, and my morning slot is usually around 9 to 10, sometimes earlier. My evening slot is usually around 6 to 8. And those are the 2 ones I try to hit. Tactically, I use this app called Typefully to schedule. I don't do different posts for different platforms. And usually my metric is I will definitely post on Twitter. And if it's LinkedIn appropriate, I will check the LinkedIn box and it will also go to LinkedIn. That's kind of generally what my any tactical stuff around it is. And a lot of that just came organically over time. I tell myself minimum 1 a day, and if you can 2. That's about it.
Mm. Do you engage on the content? Like, do you comment on other people's stuff for the sake of comment on other people's stuff?
Not for the sake of it. I only do it when I'm honestly, this is pretty embarrassing, but it's really fun. Sometimes you just have an evening free and you're like, oh my God, a viral tweet. Some people are commenting on it. Let me engage. And then you just spend like an hour just responding to people about random stuff. So there's days when that happens. That's probably once in 2 weeks, maybe, or once a week.
Mhm.
Generally, I only respond if I happen to check my phone and there's something interesting that I have to say something to. I don't do it to boost the algorithm or anything like that. And you also asked about algorithm stuff in general. I generally try to not care too much about that. There's some things you learn organically over time that the algorithm rewards and doesn't reward. But again, it's like I think it's a fool's errand to try to reverse engineer the details of that, and it's honestly too distracting. Like I have my day job. I already spend a bunch of time doing this. Like as long as I can get interesting stuff out, I'm not bothered about how the algorithm treats it.
Mhm. Can you, uh, since like I want to talk about one investing thing before
Yeah.
we like I know it's supposed to be an investing app though, but like anyway, so can you walk us through like one company that you have, how you meet the founder, basically sourcing deal, and then like how do you diligence the founder and winning the deal to thinking about exiting?
I I think venture today is extremely crowded, and there's a
Mhm,
lot of capital chasing a very few great companies.
mhm,
The most valuable 2 things in venture probably right now are sourcing and winning. It's not diligence, and I mean, even though helping the company later on is useful, it's just non-determinant of your success in some
mhm,
ways. So I think those 2 are the hardest ones. Now, when there's a deal process where a founder comes to me and says, hey, I'm raising X amount, I'm trying to close this round in 2 weeks, I'm talking to XYZ other VCs, and I'd love to pitch to you as well. I take those meetings, I do all of the stuff. I generally don't like that dynamic. This is your common terms, I guess, in venture, but this is what they call a shotgun wedding. I don't think that if I'm investing at a seed and series A in a company, that in 2 weeks I can underwrite this business, not from a business point of view. It's from a team point of view. It's the same way of saying I can't be best friends with someone with knowing them for 2 weeks. And in our style of investing at Menlo, each partner here does 2 deals a year. Those 2 deals are essentially like it's like a love marriage, right? Like you can't, if I'm going to work with this company for the next 7 to 10 years, 2 weeks is not enough time for me to assess whether I can get along with this founder.
Mhm.
So usually my approach and our approach broadly at Menlo is you form relationships with companies that you're very interested in. And I'll give you an example of that. So the Anthology Fund also serves that purpose as well for us. Um, we did the series. I led the Series A in a company called Good Fire. I met Good Fire and Eric at the Seed, and I remember he pitched to me. I loved the pitch. I loved the team's background. I thought this was an extremely important problem. I'll get into what they do. And I said, "Look, I'm interested," but eventually, I was too late to the process where they had just signed a term sheet with somebody he'd worked with before, and I respect a lot from Lightspeed, Namdi. So great. I was like, look, I still want to be a part of this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a small check, if you allow me to. I would love to write a small check from the Anthology program. Let me show you how valuable I can be in the next coming months. And let's keep talking and let me build that relationship. I did that. Over time, we spent a lot of time just emails, chatting about the future of the company, direction, how to do a bunch of things, hiring. And I was like, I care about you guys enough to do all of that. It's not to win the deal, even. I mean, for me, it was like, I just care about this company. And so eventually, when it came to a point where they were like, look, you know, I asked them how they're doing, and they're like, look, we might be gearing up for a fundraise in 2 months, and this is how we're thinking about it. I was like, this is going to be us. Like, I want to do it. And I want to do it before you even go out and have a process. And let's figure out a way to make that happen. And this is just how crazy venture is. In about 3 days, he didn't run a process. He just emailed his investor listserv of a bunch of people on email that he was in contact with. And in 3 days, they got 7 term sheets. And he chose us because he knew us. I mean, this is not, again, it's not rocket science. It's the same way, like, like dating works. Like, you don't,
Mhm.
you know, and you trust a person you've like worked with for 6 months. Like I had that kind of trust and credibility versus maybe some other people didn't. They're great too, but they just came in a little bit late and they didn't know that person for long enough. So that's how I would go and then go win that deal. Yeah. So I mean, there's not much to say. So what Goodfire does is they do mechanistic interpretability on large language models. So it helps you understand. I call it brain surgery for LLMs and all models, even outside of LLMs. We think it's really important for things like recently GPT-4o had a sycophancy problem where it was glazing all of their users. And, those are kinds of problems you can catch on a safety interpretability level. That you can tell that the weights are aligned with something that is not appropriate. We think that that's one approach, but it's a very nascent field. And this is a field that's going to be more and more important over time as AI applications are deployed in more and more important critical decisions. So it's a longer term bet on something like that. It's not a bet where you're going to see revenue go from 0 to 100 million in 3 years. Not in the next 3 years at least. So that's kind of the premise of the company.
Mm. I don't know if you have like 1 more minute,
I have time.
maybe.
I have time.
Okay, great. Maybe we do like one more question, although I have like literally wrote down 75 questions while you're
Wow.
talking. Okay, can we talk about seat strapping? Because like obviously, yesterday I was speaking at a conference. So basically we're talking about seat strapping. So like, people just
Sorry,
like
give me 1 second.
yeah, okay.
I think I pressed a button and now you're muted. Yeah. This is better?
Yeah, I can hear everything. Can you
Okay.
hear me?
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Yeah.
Can you repeat that?
Oh yeah, seat strapping. So
Mhm.
basically, I was speaking at a conference yesterday. We're discussing about this on stage. So I was thinking because of like right now, we only have some, I guess, like seed, pre-seed emerging manager fund, and then the later stage funds of, I don't know, like the AUM game funds. And then like the seed strapping is kind of perfectly fitting into that scenario, but probably not for a long term because these like tiny funds want to raise the next funds and the next fund and the next fund, and then if people only raise seed and they never raise again until IPO, what will happen? Do you think that's a actual effect that like currently AI will have on startups, or do you feel like it's a fake scenario?
I think there are some companies that may be able to seed strap themselves. I have seen a variety of companies where that happens.
Mhm.
Um, and I do think that broadly there's a good case to be made that that could happen for a larger segment of companies. um Not all companies, but there are some companies who might never need to raise after 5 million. You know, you can be profitable, you can keep the
Mhm.
team very lean, and you can grow into a place where you don't have to dilute yourself as a founder anymore and go through to IPO that way. A couple things about that. Number one is, one reason people don't want to do that often is because um competitive risk. If you seed strap and somebody else is trying to compete with you and has $100 million, it's still hard. You know, they can out drown you in budget, in marketing. They can drown you in hiring and resources. They can build features faster than you. So what would have been a great business in isolation now suddenly looks like you're competing with somebody with more resources. So there is that element of seed strapping where, this is why I say it works for some things, it doesn't work for everything. Now, if you have something so unique and so differentiated and such a moat where doesn't matter how much money you put into your competitors, you're still going to win, absolutely go do that. So that's what I would say. And there's also this effect in venture at large where, you know, probably not the most advisable for me to talk about it, but look, there are a lot of funds who are raising a lot of money. And if you've raised a lot of money in your fund, the math of venture is that you have to deploy that money into essentially growth investments. So, because if you raised, say, a $5 billion fund, how are you going to deploy $5 billion in, call it, 3 years, unless you write huge $200 million checks into growth stage companies? So in many ways, you also rely on there being a growth round in order to, you know, deploy that fund, that the big fund that you just raised. So anyway, there's the venture reason why it exists. There's a reason why companies want to not do it. Don't dilute yourself, build a great business, perfectly acceptable. There's some competitive risk when other companies in your segment decide to not do that. Can you continue to beat them? Don't know. And so that's how I would sort of paint the whole picture. And then the other thing that people miss is, I think the numbers here are pretty important. It's not, if I recall correctly from the data I've seen, there are more people seed strapping and bootstrapping their companies, but that is not at the expense of fewer people building traditional startup businesses. So both of those things can exist simultaneously too. You can just expand the pie of things that are around to be built.
Mm. Um, what do you think about like the future of hiring? Do people like, so right now everyone's vibe coding, but I try to vibe code. It's like essentially you still have to understand a lot of the coding concepts. So it's not really like I write human language and then the app just showed up. And then I realized you have to use ChatGPT to actually write the prompt to actually prompt the thing. So, but maybe I'm wrong, but like I guess like how do you think about like the future of work? Like what kind of people will actually be hired? Is that like the engineers who have ability to write prompt, or like I guess like how is like the hiring perspective kind of like shift in the AI era?
Um, I've never been a fan of lead code.
Mhm.
so so I thought that was always a terrible way to hire anyway. So I think hiring was always broken. I don't think that's a new AI phenomena. AI made it more obvious, but man, like I know so many people who are absolutely trash at building products, who have great jobs because they know how to leak code. This is just facts. Everyone knows that in tech. There are people who are directors and VPs at big companies who, I kid you not, can barely write code, barely build anything of use. This is always the case. Like, after a point, it was very easy to get a job because you could lead code, get a job, and sort of grind your way through and then get up the ladder. Today, it's very obvious that that doesn't work. And startups have always had a kind of different bar even before. the way I think about hiring is, and especially at Glean to a large extent, is there are some baseline skills that I want you to have. If that means coding, if that means vibe coding something, great. I'll give you a complex vibe coding task. Hopefully, it won't one shot it and you have to figure out the bugs and debug it. That's great. As long as you've accomplished that final goal, I'm indifferent of what tools you used. The second thing is, it's also very clear that there are a large part of engineering is not even coding. I mean, not even vibe coding. It's like debugging. It's the most annoying thing in the world. And so I like to focus a lot on, hey, can you understand complex systems and debug them? So one classic kind of interview that I like is, there's a GitHub repository of like a blogging framework. There's one bug or one feature request that I want you to fix. You've never seen this framework before, ideally. So if this question leaks, it's really hard to ask it. If you've never seen this framework before, go get your IDE, bring whatever you want to use, and figure it out. Solve the problem. It's my job to choose a problem that is sufficiently hard that I don't think vibe coding would work. And it's a real world problem that it wouldn't work. If you can solve that problem and vibe code it or prompt enough to get it, great. I don't care, as long as you solve it. So that's another technique I really liked. And then the last 3 and 4 thing I look for is, number 3, I think I look for niche expertise a lot. It's always mattered in hiring. Vibe coding is really good at doing stuff that is generically useful. It's really bad at doing extremely fine-grained stuff. And a lot of the real engineering, quote unquote, real engineering of a company is like, one of the things we had to do at Glean is absolutely tear apart Elastic from the ground up and rewrite it. Vibe coding isn't going to do that for you. There's not enough data. There was literally nobody who had, that we could find on GitHub, who'd ever done that. Otherwise, we would have just used that. So there's not a single other source of data for something like this. For that, you have to think from the ground up. And I'm sure vibe coding can help you with certain parts of it, but not the whole thing. So how do you reason from first principles or have extremely niche knowledge of general computer systems and architecture and memory and how they work is pretty important. And there's various other ways to test for that. That's not a lead code. So that's number 3. Number 4, and my most important factor, is I think interviews just do not optimize at all for you as a person and your motivations for this job. Which is like singularly the most important thing for me when I'm hiring personally. Is like my entire belief is like, look, everyone is like a line. They have a y-intercept and they have a slope. I only care about people with high slope. I think even if your intercept is low, if your slope is high enough, you're going to be great. So I look for people who are really hungry to solve problems, but at the same time, like, able to collaborate well and work with people. People like that, I think, generally can be very successful at most things. I would much rather have like a bad coder who's ready to work their ass off because they really care about this, versus like a great coder who's like, nothing interests me and this problem is just not that interesting, and then they keep whining all the time about that. And I'm like, okay, look, you're barely going to give me 20 hours of your week and you don't really care enough to do anything. I don't want someone like that. I want someone who's really invested in this. So that's kind of the 4 things that I would look for.
Love this. Okay, so I wanna end with a 1-minute fire round, because though
Sure.
I really want to keep chatting with you for the next 2 hours, but I feel like you still have to work. But okay, let's do, what's your favorite book?
My favorite book is probably The Namesake by Jhumpa Lahiri.
Who would you invite to your dinner party?
Who would I invite to a dinner party? I would probably invite. This is funny. At this moment in time, I would love to invite Arthur Rock on Twitter, but in actually all of history, I would love to invite. You know, I don't know. Great answer to this. Probably Michael Jackson.
Who made the biggest impact in your career?
The biggest impact on my career was probably my first boss at Google. This guy's name is Eyal Karmi. He was an Israeli guy. He made a huge impact. The one thing he would always tell me is, if you can do technical stuff, never stop doing technical stuff. And it stayed with me ever since. I still code all the time, even though I'm in venture.
My God. Where can we find you outside work?
I spend a lot of time reading, but if I'm outside the house, I just like, pretty basic stuff. I like to going on hikes. I like to run. I like to play sports. I play cricket on Sundays. And I like doing triathlons and stuff like that. So pretty basic Bay Area type activities.
Love. How like last question, only for you. How do you be so articulate? You are listed code the whole way. Like I love it. I was like, how do you think about like I feel like even I have thoughts, I cannot be so articulate about them. But
I'm glad that you think that. I don't know. I think in terms of how I tweet.
that's bad. We'll end there. But anyway, Deedy, thank you so much. It was such a fun conversation, and you are so. I feel like wow, you're so living up to your hype.
Oh, thank you so much,
I
Grace.
don't
That's
know
really
what's the
sweet.
best way to frame it, but
That's a really
yeah,
sweet thing to
wow.
say. I thank you so much for having me on here. I love your podcast. I've seen a bunch of these episodes, and you're doing an awesome job. So, really
Thank
appreciate
you. Thank
the
you.
time.
Okay, let me quickly end stream. Sorry. Let me what? One second.